We will handle this at home, my father hissed, his fingers digging into my uninjured shoulder as I lay bleeding on the hospital gurney. Tell them you tripped over the rug. But the emergency room doctor took one look at my x-rays and made a call that shattered our family's perfect facade forever. When the police walked through those double doors, I knew my silence was finally over. I am Erica, 33 years old, and for my entire life I was the designated shock absorber for my family's toxic secrets. As a successful forensic accountant, I spent my days uncovering corporate fraud, but my nights were spent playing the invisible compliance scapegoat to keep my parents happy. That all ended last Tuesday in Trauma Bay, 4 of Memorial Hospital. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who expected you to bleed just to keep them comfortable. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room burned my eyes. The metallic tang of antiseptic mixed with the copper scent of my own blood in the air. I was lying on a stiff hospital gurney, struggling to pull shallow breaths into my bruised lungs. My left forearm was heavily splinted by the triage nurses, radiating a white-hot agony that made my vision swim. Every time my heart beat, a fresh wave of fire shot up my arm and settled deep in my chest. My father, Thomas, stood looming over me. He was a high-wealth investment broker, a man who believed that enough money and the right connections could rewrite reality. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit, which was now slightly wrinkled from the frantic drive to the hospital. He had refused to call an ambulance when it happened. He told me that flashing lights and sirens outside our family estate would give the neighbors something to gossip about. Instead, he had shoved me into the back of his luxury sedan, cursing at me when my bleeding head stained his pristine leather seats. "Do not do this to us, Erica," he whispered, his voice dropping to a menacing octave so the passing nurses could not hear. His grip on my right shoulder tightened until I gasped. "Sabrina's engagement gala is next week. Half the city's elite will be there. Investors, politicians, people who matter. We are not ruining the biggest night of her life with your usual theatrics. You fell. You tripped. Do you understand me?" I looked past him to the corner of the trauma bay. Safely out of the way of the blood and the chaos stood my younger sister, Sabrina. She was 29 years old and the undisputed golden child of our family. She was wearing a stunning, pristine emerald cocktail dress that cost more than most people made in a month. There was not a single drop of blood on her. She was currently crying, dabbing her eyes with a tissue provided by an overly sympathetic nurse. "My sister has always been so incredibly clumsy," Sabrina wailed, her voice carrying the perfect pitch of a devastated sibling. "She just tripped right over the antique rug in my father's office and tumbled down the hardwood stairs. It happened so fast. I tried to catch her, I really did." The absolute audacity of her lie made me sick to my stomach. I closed my eyes and could still feel the heavy weight of the solid bronze horse statue she had grabbed off our father's desk. I had confronted her about a massive accounting discrepancy I had noticed in the family firm's ledgers. Sabrina had panicked. Her face had twisted into a mask of pure rage, and she had swung that heavy bronze statue directly at my head. I had raised my left arm to protect my skull, and the sickening crack of my own bone breaking still echoed loudly in my ears. Yet here she was, playing the victim while I lay broken on a hospital bed. I looked at my father, the man who was supposed to protect me. This was the same man who had ignored my academic awards to praise Sabrina's mediocre grades. The same man who demanded I move into a small rental property they owned, just so they could keep a thumb on my life, never knowing I had built a highly lucrative independent firm of my own. I had spent 33 years shrinking myself so Sabrina could shine. I was the dumping ground for their frustrations, the ugly duckling they kept around to make their beautiful swan look better. The heavy glass door to the trauma bay slid open, interrupting my father's threatening glare. Dr. Gallagher stepped inside. He was a tall, no-nonsense trauma surgeon with tired eyes and a digital tablet clutched tightly in his hands. He did not have that deferential, starstruck look that most people got when dealing with my wealthy, influential family. He just looked incredibly angry. My father immediately plastered on his fake country club smile and stepped away from my bed. "Doctor, thank goodness you are here." My clumsy daughter took a terrible spill down the stairs. We would like to get her casted and discharged as soon as possible. We have private physicians who can handle her follow-up care from the comfort of our estate. There is really no need to keep her in this crowded hospital. Dr. Gallagher did not look at my father. He walked straight past him and stopped at the foot of my bed. He looked down at me with an expression of deep clinical concern. Then he tapped his tablet and a glowing image of my shattered arm appeared on the large wall monitor behind him. I have been an emergency room attending for 15 years, Dr. Gallagher said, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. I know exactly what a fall looks like. I know what a tumble down a staircase looks like. And I know what a defensive wound looks like. Sabrina stopped crying instantly. The performative, dramatic tears dried up in a fraction of a second. She stood frozen in the corner, clutching her expensive designer purse against her chest. My father dropped his fake smile, his posture stiffening as he sensed a threat to his authority. "Excuse me," my father challenged, puffing out his chest and using the intimidating tone he reserved for underperforming employees. "What exactly are you implying, Doctor?" Dr. Gallagher turned to face him, completely unfazed by the wealthy man standing in his trauma bay. "This is a severe spiral fracture of the ulna," Dr. Gallagher explained, pointing to the jagged white line illuminating the dark screen, "coupled with severe localized bone contusions on the outer edge of the forearm. A person does not get this specific injury pattern from tripping over a rug or falling down some stairs. A person gets this specific injury when they raise their arm to block a heavy, blunt object from striking their head." The silence in the trauma bay was deafening. My father's face went completely blank, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. He stepped directly in front of me physically, trying to block the doctor's view of my bruised body. "I think you are grossly overstepping your professional bounds, doctor," my father said, his voice dripping with barely concealed threat. "I am a major donor to the board of this hospital. My family built the pediatric wing. You will cast her arm, give us her pain medication, and discharge her to my custody immediately." "I do not care who you are," Dr. Gallagher interrupted cleanly, his voice echoing loudly in the small room. "I care about my patient, and my patient has injuries entirely consistent with aggravated assault." Sabrina let out a loud gasp from the corner. "She is lying," Sabrina shrieked, completely abandoning her sweet, concerned sister act. "She is just jealous of my engagement. She has always been jealous of me. She wants to ruin my life and my gala. She did this to herself just to frame me." I had not said a single word. I had not opened my mouth to accuse anyone. But their guilty consciences were doing all the heavy lifting for me, spilling their panic all over the sterile hospital floor. My father pulled out his phone, his fingers jabbing aggressively at the screen. "I want her discharged right this second. We are leaving. I will have the hospital administrator down here in 5 minutes to discuss your unacceptable bedside manner and your ridiculous accusations. We will handle this family matter at home where it belongs." Dr. Gallagher calmly reached up and turned off the wall monitor. He tucked his tablet under his arm and looked my father dead in the eye. "You cannot discharge her, sir, and you are not taking her anywhere." "Why not?" my father demanded, his face turning purple with rage. "Do you know who you are talking to?" Because a deep, authoritative voice answered from the doorway. We all turned around. The heavy sliding doors to the trauma bay were pushed wide open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the room, their hands resting cautiously near their duty belts. Their radios crackled in the tense, suffocating silence of the room. "Because the doctor invoked mandatory reporting protocols for domestic assault," the taller officer said, stepping fully into the room and looking directly at my father and my sister. "Now I need everyone who is not the patient to step away from the bed and move toward the hallway. We have some serious questions that need answering, and we will be speaking to the victim alone." "We will handle this at home," my father hissed, his fingers digging into my uninjured shoulder as I lay bleeding on the hospital gurney. "Tell them you tripped over the rug." But the emergency room doctor took one look at my x-rays and made a call that shattered our family's perfect facade forever. When the police walked through those double doors, I knew my silence was finally over. I am Erica, 33 years old, and for my entire life, I was the designated shock absorber for my family's toxic secrets. As a successful forensic accountant, I spent my days uncovering corporate fraud, but my nights were spent playing the invisible compliance scapegoat to keep my parents happy. That all ended last Tuesday in Trauma Bay 4 of Memorial Hospital. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who expected you to bleed just to keep them comfortable. The taller police officer gestured toward the sliding glass doors, instructing my father and sister to step out into the hallway. Thomas's face was a mask of simmering fury, but he knew better than to argue with law enforcement in front of hospital staff. He grabbed Sabrina by the elbow and steered her out of the trauma bay. My mother Linda lingered behind for just a fraction of a second. She leaned in close to my face, pretending to adjust the thin hospital blanket over my shivering shoulders. The scent of her expensive floral perfume was suffocating. "Listen to me very carefully," Linda whispered, her voice a razor-sharp hiss that barely carried over the steady beeping of my heart monitor. "If you say one word to these officers, if you do anything to ruin your sister's engagement gala next week, you are finished. We will cut you out of the family trust entirely. You will be fired from the investment firm before you even leave this hospital. And I will personally see to it that you are evicted from the condo we so generously let you rent. You will have absolutely nothing. Do you hear me? You will be on the street." I stared up at her, my face completely blank. For 33 years, that exact threat had kept me in line. It was the invisible chain they used to drag me back to my designated place as the family failure. I gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Satisfied that she had successfully terrified me into submission, Linda straightened her posture, smoothed her designer skirt, and walked out to join my father and sister in the waiting area. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind her, sealing me alone in the room for a brief moment before the officers would return. I did not cry. My heart rate on the monitor did not spike with panic. Instead, a cold, deeply satisfied smile slowly spread across my face. My parents believed they held all the cards. They truly believed I was a financially dependent, pathetic middle child who relied on their scraps of generosity to survive. They thought the entry-level accounting job they gave me at the family firm was my only source of income. They thought the modest two-bedroom condo I rented from them was my only shelter. They had no idea that they were threatening a ghost. I had not relied on their money in over a decade. While they were busy grooming Sabrina for high society marriages and throwing lavish parties, I had been quietly building an empire of my own. I secretly ran a highly lucrative independent forensic accounting firm that contracted directly with federal banks and international regulatory agencies. My days at the family firm were nothing but a smokescreen, a convenient way to keep my parents entirely unaware of my actual life. I held an 8-figure net worth that sat safely in diversified, untraceable accounts. The modest condo they threatened to evict me from was nothing but a decoy. It was a place I kept slightly messy with cheap furniture, a place they could drop by unannounced to feel superior. My actual home was a $4 million ultra-modern estate located in the heart of the downtown arts district, purchased under an anonymous corporate entity. I had spent years anticipating this exact moment, meticulously preparing for the day they would finally push me too far and try to destroy me. The sliding door opened again, and the 2 police officers stepped back into the trauma bay. The taller one pulled out a small notepad, while the other stood near the foot of my bed, offering a sympathetic but professional smile. "I am Officer Davis," the taller one said, clicking his pen. "The doctor has informed us that your injuries are not consistent with a fall. We need you to tell us exactly what happened in your father's office today. You are safe here, ma'am. No one is going to come in and interrupt you." I took a deep breath, wincing slightly as my bruised ribs protested the movement. I looked directly into Officer Davis's eyes and delivered my statement with absolute chilling clarity. "I did not fall down the stairs," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the panic my mother expected me to have. "My sister Sabrina intentionally attacked me. We were arguing in our father's office. She picked up a solid bronze equestrian statue from his desk and swung it directly at my head with full force. I raised my left arm to block the impact, which is how my forearm was shattered. It was not an accident. It was a premeditated violent assault. Officer Davis stopped writing for a second and looked up, clearly surprised by my lack of hesitation. Most victims of family violence struggle to articulate the truth, often trying to protect their abusers. I had no such desire. I gave them every detail. I described the exact weight and shape of the statue. I detailed where I was standing, where Sabrina was standing, and the exact angle of the swing. I gave them a clinical, detached forensic breakdown of the crime scene. "Why were you arguing?" the second officer asked quietly. "What provoked the attack?" I paused, considering how much to reveal right now. I confronted her about an accounting discrepancy I found in the family firm's ledgers, I replied. She became extremely agitated when I asked her to explain the missing funds. The officers exchanged a meaningful look. Financial motives always escalated simple assaults into complex criminal investigations. They thanked me for my statement, advising me that a detective would be assigned to my case shortly. They told me they were going out to the waiting room to formally question Sabrina and my parents based on my testimony. As soon as they left the room, I used my uninjured right hand to reach for my cell phone resting on the bedside tray. I ignored the 12 missed calls from my mother and dialed the only emergency contact I actually trusted. David was my business partner, my best friend, and the only person in the world who knew the complete truth about my double life. He answered on the first ring. "I am already at the hospital," David said, his voice tight with worry. "I am in the lobby. Which floor are you on?" "Trauma Bay 4, I replied. "But David, I do not just need a ride home. I need you to bring the encrypted laptop from the secure vault at the office. Bring it up here right now." There was a brief pause on the line. "Are we finally doing this?" David asked. "Are we dropping the hammer?" "We are dropping the entire armory," I said, staring at the thick white plaster encasing my left arm. "Just get here." David arrived 10 minutes later, bypassing the waiting room entirely by using the staff elevators. He slipped into my room carrying a sleek, unassuming black messenger bag. His eyes widened when he saw the state of my arm and the bruising blooming across my collarbone, but he knew me well enough not to offer useless pity. He unzipped the bag and pulled out my heavily modified military-grade encrypted laptop. He set up the rolling hospital tray table across my lap, adjusting the height so I could type comfortably with my right hand. The physical pain radiating from my fractures was intense, but the rush of adrenaline flooding my system easily overpowered it. I was done playing the obedient victim. I was done shrinking myself to fit into their twisted narrative. It was time to go to work. I typed in my complex alphanumeric password, bypassing 3 separate layers of biometric security before reaching my customized desktop. Years ago, when my father demanded I manage the basic IT infrastructure for his investment firm to save him money on contractors, I had built their entire network from the ground up. I had also quietly installed multiple invisible backdoor access points that allowed me complete undetected administrative control over their entire server architecture. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I initiated a silent background trace on the family firm's network. I wanted to see exactly what Sabrina had been trying to hide when I confronted her about that accounting discrepancy. I expected to find a few $1,000s missing, perhaps a shopping spree she had tried to expense to a corporate account. What I found instead made my breath catch in my throat. The network monitoring dashboard flared to life on my screen, highlighting a massive spike in data traffic. Someone was currently logged into the main administrative server, and they were executing a frantic, wide-scale data deletion protocol. They were not just deleting a few invoices. They were aggressively scrubbing years' worth of offshore wire transfer logs, client portfolio adjustments, and hidden shell company registrations. I ran a quick geolocation trace on the active user session. The IP address pinged back instantly. The deletion commands were originating from a mobile device connected to the Memorial Hospital public Wi-Fi network. Sabrina was sitting out in the waiting room, knowing the police were about to question her, and she was desperately using her phone to wipe the firm's servers clean before anyone could look too closely at the books. "She is scrubbing the servers right now," I murmured, my eyes darting across the cascading lines of code on my screen. "She is trying to burn the evidence." "Can you stop her?" David asked, leaning over my shoulder to look at the massive data purge happening in real time. "I can do better than that," I replied, my fingers moving with practiced precision. "I can intercept it." I bypassed her deletion commands and initiated a covert data recovery script. As Sabrina thought she was permanently destroying the files, my backdoor program was silently catching every single byte of data and copying it directly onto my encrypted hard drive. I opened the first intercepted file, a heavily redacted client ledger from 3 years ago. I cross-referenced it with an offshore banking confirmation receipt she had just tried to incinerate. The numbers on the screen were staggering. This was not a simple case of a spoiled daughter stealing a few luxury handbags. Sabrina had been systematically embezzling millions of dollars from my father's high-net-worth clients. The money was being funneled through a complex web of dummy corporations directly into her personal accounts and into the failing tech startup owned by her fiancé. I sat back against the stiff hospital pillows, the glow of the screen illuminating the cold realization settling over me. Sabrina did not attack me out of simple sibling rivalry or jealousy over a wedding. She shattered my arm because she was terrified. She was trying to silence me to cover up a multi-million-dollar corporate felony. And my parents were out there right now, threatening to destroy my life in order to protect a criminal. They had no idea they had just declared war on the one person who held the digital keys to their total ruin. 2 hours later, the hospital finally discharged me with a heavy fiberglass cast and a bottle of prescription painkillers. I had no intention of taking. I needed my mind sharp. I bypassed the decoy condo entirely. Instead, David drove me straight to the secure underground garage of my actual home. A sprawling, ultra-modern estate hidden in the hills just outside the city center. It was a fortress of steel and glass, purchased through a blind trust and protected by state-of-the-art security systems. Once inside, I settled into my home office. It was a massive room lined with monitors, a far cry from the cramped cubicle my father assigned me at his firm. I connected the encrypted hard drive to my primary workstation. The data recovery script had done its job perfectly. Sabrina thought she had incinerated the firm's financial history, but I now possessed every single byte. Using my specialized forensic software, I began tracing the digital breadcrumbs. It did not take long for the true scale of my sister's greed to materialize on my screens. Sabrina had not just skimmed off the top, she had been systematically draining $15 million from our father's highest net worth clients over the past 3 years. She had created a labyrinth of phantom vendor accounts and fake consulting fees. The money was being funneled directly into offshore accounts to fund her lavish lifestyle, but the bulk of the stolen $15 million was being aggressively pumped into her fiancé Colin and his failing tech startup. Colin had been burning through cash with nothing to show for it, and Sabrina was stealing from my father's clients to keep him afloat. She knew the quarterly auditors would catch the massive shortfall in a matter of weeks. She swung that statue at me because I was the only person who had noticed the initial cracks in her financial facade. The desperation of a thief facing exposure had turned her violent. By the next morning, my parents realized I was not at the decoy condo. I had completely vanished from their radar, and their panic was palpable. But instead of showing concern for their injured daughter, Thomas and Linda went on the offensive. They knew the police were investigating the assault, so they needed to destroy my credibility before I could speak on the record again. They launched a vicious, highly coordinated public smear campaign. My mother uploaded a tearful, dramatic video to all of her social media channels. She sat in her pristine living room dabbing at perfectly dry eyes, addressing her thousands of wealthy followers. "It breaks my heart to share this family tragedy publicly," Linda said to the camera, her voice quivering with practiced sorrow. "But our eldest daughter, Erica, is suffering from a severe psychotic break. She has gone missing and we are terrified for her safety. She recently suffered a terrible fall down the stairs, but her mental state has deteriorated so badly that she is now fabricating horrific stories about her own sister. Erica has always struggled with deep-seated jealousy regarding Sabrina, and with Sabrina's beautiful engagement gala coming up next week, Erica simply snapped, "Please pray for her to get the psychiatric help she desperately needs." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She effectively painted me as a jealous, unstable spinster who was trying to ruin her younger sister's perfect life. To the outside world, it looked like the heartbreaking plea of a concerned mother. To me, it was a declaration of war. They were trying to publicly invalidate any evidence I might bring to the police by labeling me insane, preparing the ground to dismiss any fraud accusations as delusions. The fallout from my mother's video was instantaneous. My phone screen lit up like a slot machine as messages poured in from our extensive network of relatives. The extended family, who had always eagerly consumed my parents' narrative, bought the victim act without a single question. My Aunt Patricia texted me a long, condescending paragraph demanding I drop the police investigation immediately and check myself into a residential facility. "You are tearing your poor mother apart," she wrote. "How could you be so toxic and ungrateful after everything Thomas and Linda have done for you? Stop trying to ruin your sister's happiness just because your own life is empty." My cousins chimed in, flooding my voicemail with angry demands to stop embarrassing the family name. They insisted I was acting completely unhinged and needed heavy medication. Not a single person asked about my shattered arm. Not one relative questioned why I had supposedly fled, if I was just seeking attention. They rallied behind Sabrina, the beautiful, successful golden child who was supposedly being terrorized by her crazy, jealous older sister. They were playing their assigned roles perfectly. The flying monkeys were out in full force, swarming to protect the family image and tear down the designated scapegoat. 5 years ago, this kind of unified familial rejection would have crushed me. I would have internalized their hateful words and doubted my own sanity. But sitting in my multi-million-dollar estate, staring at the hard evidence of Sabrina's $15 million felony, their messages were nothing but background noise. I simply blocked their numbers one by one. I did not reply to a single text message. I did not post a rebuttal video online. I did not waste an ounce of my energy arguing with people committed to misunderstanding me. I used the silence to my absolute advantage. While they were busy performing for their social circles and congratulating themselves on handling the family embarrassment, I was meticulously building an airtight federal case. I spent the next 48 hours compiling the financial forensic evidence. I mapped out the entire embezzlement scheme, linking the fraudulent wire transfers directly to Sabrina's personal routing numbers and Colin's business accounts. I documented the exact timeline showing how my discovery of the accounting error perfectly aligned with her violent attack in my father's office. Then I reached out to a contact I had cultivated through my independent firm. Agent Miller was a senior investigator in the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. Someone I had assisted on a major banking fraud case 2 years prior. I did not give him the entire file yet. Instead, I anonymously forwarded a small, heavily encrypted fragment of the embezzlement proof to his secure server. I attached a simple message linking the physical assault report at Memorial Hospital to the $15 million corporate fraud at my father's investment firm. I gave the federal government exactly enough bait to start digging into Sabrina's accounts on their own. The trap was being laid, and my family was too busy celebrating their social media sympathy to notice the crosshairs settling on their backs. They were oblivious to the storm. On the 4th day of my strategic isolation, the security gate alert chimed in my office. A private courier was standing outside the high walls of my estate, requesting a signature for a priority legal delivery. I frowned, watching the security camera feed. My parents did not know this address. They believed I was hiding out in a cheap motel or wandering the streets in a psychotic haze. I authorized the gate to open and walked down to the front door to receive the heavy manila envelope. I tore open the seal and pulled out a stack of formal legal documents. It was a temporary restraining order issued by a municipal judge alongside a civil lawsuit for defamation. The petitioner was Sabrina. I read through the sworn affidavit she had submitted to the court. Sabrina claimed under penalty of perjury that I was a violent, unstable stalker who had threatened her life. She claimed I was trying to extort the family and that my presence posed an immediate physical danger to her and her guests. The judge had granted the emergency order based on my mother's public statements and Sabrina's fabricated terror. The order legally banned me from coming within 500 feet of Sabrina, her home, or her upcoming engagement gala. The accompanying lawsuit sought to freeze my known bank accounts to pay for her supposed emotional distress and defamation damages. They were trying to financially starve me into submission, thinking my entry-level salary at their firm was all I had. I stood in the foyer of my hidden estate holding the court order that officially banished me from the family. A dark, genuine laugh escaped my lips. They thought they were backing me into a corner. They had no idea they were bringing a pocket knife to a nuclear fight. I was ready to destroy them completely, once and for all, with absolute precision. The game was finally over. I slowly walked back up the sweeping glass staircase to my office to prepare for the next phase of my retaliation. My family was about to learn the true, devastating cost of their betrayal. The restraining order sitting on my desk was not a setback. It was a golden ticket. By filing a civil defamation lawsuit alongside the emergency protection order, my younger sister had unwittingly opened the door to a legal process she clearly did not understand. Discovery. I immediately scheduled a meeting with my corporate attorney, a razor-sharp litigator named Diane, who charged $1,000 an hour and was worth every single penny. I sat in her pristine corner office overlooking the city and handed her the ridiculous court documents my parents had sent. Diane read through Sabrina's fabricated claims of me being an unstable, violent stalker trying to extort the family. She did not even blink. I told Diane I wanted to file a formal counter-discovery request immediately. To defend myself against claims of extortion and defamation, I explained, I needed to establish my sister's state of mind and her true motive for filing the suit. I instructed Diane to subpoena Sabrina's personal bank records, the business accounts for her fiancé's tech startup, and the last 3 years of the family investment firm's transaction ledgers. Diane smiled a terrifying, brilliant smile. She drafted the subpoenas before I even left her office, ensuring they were filed directly with the municipal court that afternoon by a dedicated courier. The beauty of the legal system is that when you sue someone, you cannot hide your own financial reality from the defense. Sabrina had handed me the legal authority to rip her finances apart in broad daylight. She thought she was shutting me down, but she had just given me a skeleton key to their entire vault. For years, I had watched them use the legal system to bully contractors and silence anyone who questioned their business practices. Now I was turning their own weapon against them. The discovery process would be relentless. We would demand every text message, every email, and every hidden offshore routing number they thought was safely buried. Diane assured me that if they tried to destroy any documents after receiving the subpoenas, it would be an automatic felony for spoliation of evidence. It took exactly 24 hours for my father to realize the catastrophic mistake they had made. When the court issued the discovery notices to the family firm, demanding full transparency of their ledgers to satisfy my defense, Thomas must have felt the ground completely fall out from under him. He knew the books were cooked. He knew a formal legal audit would expose the missing $15 million and lead to immediate federal indictments for everyone involved in the executive suite. My phone buzzed with an incoming voicemail late that evening. It was my father, and the mask of the refined, controlled investment broker had completely disintegrated. His voice was unhinged, thick with panic and unfiltered rage. "You think you are so smart, Erica," he snarled into the recording, his breathing heavy and erratic. "You think a petty counter-lawsuit is going to save you. You have no idea what you have just done. You are dead to this family. Do you hear me? Dead." I am pouring the entire weight of our family fortune into crushing you in court. I am hiring the most vicious litigators in the state. We are going to drag this out until you are bankrupt, living on the streets, and begging us for a handout. You will be left with absolutely nothing. You are a failure, and I will make sure everyone knows it. He went on for another 2 minutes, making wild threats about destroying my career and ensuring I never worked in accounting again. He demanded I withdraw the countersuit immediately. He threatened to call the police and tell them I was extorting him. He said he would make sure I never spoke to another member of our extended family again. He had no idea I owned my own highly lucrative firm and did not care about the relatives who enabled his toxic behavior for decades. I saved the voicemail to my secure server. It was a beautiful piece of evidence. A confession of intent, wrapped in a desperate, flailing threat that proved he knew exactly what Sabrina had been doing behind closed doors. While my father was busy shouting threats into the void, I was focused on the actual endgame. The encrypted fragment of evidence I had sent to Agent Miller at the FBI had done its job. He reached out to me through a secure, untraceable channel. We arranged a highly confidential meeting at a neutral location outside the city. I sat across from him in a quiet diner, handing over a secondary encrypted drive containing more pieces of the puzzle. Miller confirmed that federal investigators were quietly monitoring Sabrina's accounts, but they needed a specific trigger to freeze the assets and make an arrest without tipping off the shell company managers. The money was moving too fast through untraceable offshore shell companies located in jurisdictions that did not cooperate with United States authorities. They needed to catch her in the act of transferring the bulk of the funds from a domestic account. That was when I realized the true purpose of Sabrina's upcoming engagement gala. The timeline of the embezzlement was too tight. The end-of-quarter auditors were scheduled to review my father's firm in exactly 10 days. Sabrina needed to wash the last remaining millions of the stolen funds out of the country before the audit began, and she needed a massive, chaotic distraction to cover the digital tracks of the final wire transfer. The engagement gala was not just a party. It was a high-society money laundering operation. Sabrina had organized a massive charity auction as part of the event. Wealthy guests would make enormous donations, creating a flood of legitimate incoming capital. Under the cover of that massive influx of cash, Sabrina planned to execute her final offshore transfer, mixing the stolen funds with the charity money to bypass standard banking alerts. It was actually a brilliant strategy, assuming nobody was looking for it. But I was looking right at it, mapping out every single digital backdoor she had left open. I returned to my hidden estate just as the afternoon mail was being delivered by my private security team. Among the standard business correspondence was a thick, oversized envelope made of heavy cream-colored cardstock. It bore my family's return address. I opened it to find an ornate gold-embossed invitation to Sabrina's engagement gala. It was absurd. I had just been legally banned from coming within 500 feet of her. Yet here was an invitation to the very event she claimed I was trying to ruin. Then a small piece of stationery slipped out from behind the invitation. It was a handwritten note from Sabrina, written in her perfectly looped, arrogant cursive. The words dripped with the same venom she had used to torment me since childhood. "You are banned from the property by the restraining order," the note read. "I just wanted you to see exactly what you are missing. Enjoy watching my perfect life from the gutter, you ugly dropout." She could not resist. Her narcissism and her need to gloat had completely overridden her basic common sense. She wanted to twist the knife to make sure I felt properly humiliated and excluded from the biggest night of her life. She wanted me to sit in my supposedly dingy condo and cry over her triumph. She was so blinded by her lifelong habit of bullying me that she forgot she was currently committing a federal crime that could land her in prison for decades. Her arrogance was going to be her absolute downfall, and I was going to ensure everyone saw it unfold. I stood in the expansive foyer of my pristine $4 million estate, reading her cruel little note. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness. I felt the electric thrill of absolute victory. Sabrina had just handed me everything I needed. She had confirmed the exact time, the exact date, and the exact location where she would be distracted by her own vanity. She had given me the perfect window to strike. I smiled, a genuine expression of pure, unadulterated anticipation. I picked up my phone and dialed my business partner. David answered immediately. "The rabbit is setting up the final run," I told him, staring at the gold-embossed invitation in my hand. "Sabrina just gave us the exact time and location of the offshore money transfer. I need you to call Agent Miller at the FBI. Tell him the charity auction is the front for the final wash. He needs to have his cyber division ready to move on my signal. We are going to build a script that intercepts that transfer the second she hits confirm." "And David?" "Yes," he asked, catching the predatory edge in my voice. "Cancel all my meetings for tomorrow afternoon," I instructed smoothly. "I am going shopping for an emerald gala dress. We are crashing the party." Sabrina wanted me to watch her perfect life from the gutter, but I was going to stand in the center of her ballroom and tear her false empire down brick by brick. The engagement gala would be a night our family would never forget. The invisible middle child was dead. I purged my closet of the oversized beige sweaters and scuffed flats I used to wear to family events just to blend into the wallpaper. For 33 years, I had deliberately made myself small to avoid my father's criticism and my sister's jealousy. That era was completely over. I walked back into my home office and sat down at my primary workstation. The monitors cast a cool blue light across my face as I began to write the code that would destroy my sister's life. The digital trap had to be absolutely flawless. Sabrina was planning to initiate the $15 million wire transfer during the peak of the charity auction, using the massive influx of donations to mask the outgoing funds. She would be using the family firm's administrative credentials to bypass the standard banking holds. I opened a secure terminal and began writing a complex interception script. It was a digital tripwire designed to sit silently inside the firm's main server. The moment Sabrina entered her authorization codes and hit confirm, my script would instantly hijack the routing protocol. Instead of bouncing through a maze of untraceable offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the $15 million would be immediately redirected into a secure holding account managed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. David arrived at my estate an hour later carrying hard copies of the network schematics. We spent the entire evening running simulations testing the script against every possible firewall the bank might have in place. I contacted Agent Miller on our secure line and provided him with the exact routing numbers for the FBI holding account. Miller confirmed that his cyber division would be on standby, ready to monitor the transaction in real time. We had the digital weapon armed and ready. But to spring the trap perfectly, I needed to be in the room when she pulled the trigger. I needed to see her face, and to do that I had to legally destroy the restraining order she had filed against me. The next morning, I walked into the municipal courthouse alongside my corporate attorney, Diane. The building was a cavernous structure of cold marble and echoing hallways. Diane looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. Sabrina, of course, did not bother to show up for the preliminary hearing. She had sent a junior lawyer from my father's legal team, assuming the temporary restraining order would simply be upheld without a fight because I was supposed to be a terrified, unrepresented outcast. The junior lawyer stood before the judge and confidently recited Sabrina's fabricated claims. He stated that I was experiencing a severe mental breakdown and posed a direct physical threat to my sister's safety. Diane did not even wait for him to finish. She stepped up to the podium and handed the judge a thick certified folder. Inside was the official police report from Memorial Hospital, alongside a sworn medical affidavit from Dr. Gallagher. The judge, a stern-looking man with a gray beard, adjusted his glasses and read the documents in absolute silence. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the junior lawyer shifting uncomfortably on his feet. Diane spoke with lethal precision. "Your Honor, the petitioner Sabrina has committed blatant perjury to obtain this emergency order. As the medical records and the police report clearly state, my client is not the aggressor. She is the victim of an aggravated assault committed by the petitioner herself. The petitioner shattered my client's arm with a heavy object and is currently under active criminal investigation for the attack. She filed this restraining order not out of fear, but as a calculated tactic to silence her victim and isolate her from the family." The judge looked up from the medical affidavit and glared at my father's junior lawyer. The young man turned pale and began to stammer clearly, unaware that his wealthy clients had lied to him. The judge did not hesitate. He struck his gavel with a loud, sharp crack that echoed off the high ceiling. "The temporary restraining order is dissolved immediately," he announced, his voice laced with disgust. "Furthermore, I am forwarding this transcript to the district attorney to review for perjury charges against the petitioner. This court will not be used as a weapon to harass victims of violence." We walked out of the courthouse completely victorious. I was legally cleared to attend the engagement gala. The invisible barrier my family had tried to build around me was shattered. Now it was time to address the physical transformation. I spent the afternoon at an exclusive high-end boutique downtown. I bypassed the modest conservative racks I usually hid behind and walked straight to the couture section. I needed armor for the battle ahead, but I wanted it to be breathtaking. I selected a custom-tailored floor-length emerald green gown. The color was a deliberate choice, representing both the wealth my family worshipped and the deep toxic envy they harbored. The silk fabric clung perfectly to my figure, projecting an aura of absolute power and undeniable confidence. I paired the gown with diamond drop earrings and a sleek, structured hairstyle that left my face completely open and defiant. My left arm was still in a cast, but I had it wrapped in a sleek black silk covering that made it look like a deliberate fashion statement rather than a vulnerability. When I looked in the dressing room mirror, I did not recognize the woman staring back at me. The frightened, obedient scapegoat was gone forever. An apex predator had taken her place. The engagement gala was being held at the Crestwood Country Club, a historic, ultra-exclusive venue known for its sprawling, manicured grounds and strict adherence to old money aesthetics. It was the exact kind of place my father used to flaunt his wealth and social dominance. I arrived 20 minutes after the main reception began. I did not take a cheap rideshare or drive my old sensible sedan. I arrived in a chauffeur-driven midnight black Maybach that glided silently up the winding driveway. The valet rushed forward to open my door. I stepped out onto the cobblestone entrance, letting the cool evening air wash over me. The sound of a live string quartet drifted from the main ballroom, mixing with the low hum of expensive conversations and clinking crystal glasses. I walked up the grand stone steps and pushed through the heavy oak double doors. The main lobby was dripping in floral arrangements and golden lighting. Dozens of extended family members, aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had spent the last week sending me hateful text messages and demanding I seek psychiatric help, were gathered near the entrance. They were sipping champagne and laughing, completely oblivious to the criminal enterprise funding their free drinks. I walked directly into the center of the lobby. The transformation in the room was instantaneous. My Aunt Patricia, who had called me a toxic, ungrateful spinster just days ago, was in the middle of a sentence. Her mouth dropped open, and she froze. The laughter died abruptly. One by one, my relatives turned to stare at me. They expected to see a broken, disheveled woman spiraling through a psychotic break. Instead, they were confronted with a stunning, commanding presence radiating undeniable wealth and authority. The silence that swept through the lobby was heavy and absolute. I did not avert my gaze. I looked directly into their eyes, holding my head high. I watched their smug judgment curdle into profound confusion and deep, uncomfortable intimidation. They stepped aside, parting like the Red Sea, to let me walk past them toward the grand ballroom. The ballroom itself was a masterpiece of financial excess. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, illuminating hundreds of guests in formal wear. Waiters circulated with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. At the far end of the room, my father stood near a massive ice sculpture, holding court with a group of wealthy investors. My mother Linda stood beside him, wearing a fixed, practiced smile. It took exactly 30 seconds for them to spot me. I saw my mother's smile vanish instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She grabbed my father's arm and pointed in my direction. Thomas turned around, his face flushing a deep, angry red the moment his eyes locked onto mine. He excused himself from his investors and began marching across the ballroom floor toward me, his heavy footsteps practically vibrating with rage. He snapped his fingers at two burly club security guards, gesturing for them to follow him. I stood my ground near the center of the room, calmly accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I took a slow, deliberate sip as my father closed the distance between us. He stopped just inches from my face, signaling the security guards to flank me on either side. "I told you failures do not belong here!" Thomas hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper, designed to avoid causing a public scene. "You are violating a court order, Erica. You are insane, and you are trespassing. Security is going to drag you out the back door and throw you directly into a police car. Get out of my sight before I destroy you." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I slowly lowered my champagne glass and reached into the small designer clutch hanging from my shoulder. I pulled out a solid metal card embossed with the Crestwood Country Club crest and a platinum insignia. I held it up so the overhead chandelier light caught the platinum lettering. It was a VIP Platinum Investor Badge, an elite membership tier that cost $500,000 a year to maintain. I had purchased it through my secret corporate entity specifically for this night. The two security guards looked at the badge, then looked at my father, and immediately stepped back, lowering their hands. They knew exactly what that badge meant. I outranked my father in this building. I was untouchable. My father stared at the platinum card, his face draining of color as his brain struggled to comprehend how his supposedly destitute daughter possessed that level of elite access. His jaw worked silently, his eyes darting from the card to my custom emerald gown. I leaned in slightly, the scent of my expensive perfume cutting through his cheap cologne. "I am not a failure, Dad," I replied, my voice perfectly level and cold as ice. "I am the bait." My father stared at the solid metal card in my hand. His face morphed from a mask of aggressive authority into a portrait of absolute defeat. The Crestwood Country Club did not care about his legacy or his social standing in the community. They cared entirely about capital. The platinum insignia on my badge represented a level of liquid wealth he could only dream of managing. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The two security guards had already taken several steps back, completely abandoning his command. They politely nodded to me and faded back into the perimeter of the ballroom, leaving Thomas entirely powerless and isolated on the floor. I slipped the card back into my clutch, the soft click of the clasp echoing in the tense space between us. Before my father could recover his composure, a flash of white silk caught my eye. Sabrina was pushing her way through a crowd of wealthy investors. She wore a custom bridal gown that cost $50,000, paid for entirely by the stolen retirement funds of the people she was currently smiling at. The dress was an architectural marvel of imported lace and hand-sewn pearls, completely excessive for an engagement party but perfectly suited to her raging narcissism. Sabrina did not notice my platinum badge. She only saw the sister she had bullied and belittled her entire life standing in the middle of her meticulously curated event, wearing a dress that outshone her own. Her smile vanished as she reached us. She grabbed my father by the sleeve, her manicured acrylic nails digging fiercely into his suit jacket. "What is she doing here?" Sabrina hissed, keeping her voice low so the nearby guests would not hear. Her eyes darted around the room, terrified that someone important might witness the confrontation. "I have a restraining order against her. Call the police and have her dragged out right now. She's going to ruin my engagement." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. The cold bubbles danced on my tongue. I truly enjoyed the sheer panic radiating from her. "The restraining order was dissolved this morning," I replied, my voice smooth and utterly calm. "The judge was not particularly fond of the perjury you committed to obtain it. He actually forwarded the transcript to the district attorney for criminal review." Sabrina turned a sickly shade of gray. She looked at our father for confirmation, but Thomas just stared at the marble floor, completely paralyzed by the realization that I now held more power in this room than he did. "You need to leave," Sabrina demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and pure hatred. "You are insane. You are obsessed with me. This is my night, and you are not going to destroy it because you are a miserable, lonely dropout. Get out of my sight before I make a scene." I handed my empty champagne flute to a passing waiter. I stepped closer to my sister. For the first time in 33 years, I did not shrink away from her hostility. I leaned in, closing the distance between us until my lips were just inches from her ear. I could smell the sharp, metallic tang of fear sweating through her expensive perfume. "I am not here because I am obsessed with you, Sabrina," I whispered, my tone dropping to a lethal quiet register. "I am here because I know about the $15 million shortfall in the Cayman Islands accounts. I know exactly how much you funneled into Colin's failing startup. And I know the quarterly auditors are going to find the massive gaping hole in the ledger on Monday morning." I stepped back and watched the smug, entitled facade completely shatter. It was like watching a porcelain doll drop onto concrete. Sabrina stopped breathing. Her eyes widened in absolute primal terror. The fake victim persona vanished, replaced by the raw, naked panic of a cornered criminal. She tried to speak, but her throat simply refused to work. Her hands began to shake so violently that she had to clutch the folds of her $50,000 dress just to hide the tremors. At that exact moment, my mother intervened. Linda had watched the interaction from the ice sculpture and realized her golden child was in the middle of a catastrophic meltdown. She practically sprinted across the ballroom floor, shoving past a group of elderly socialites to reach us. Linda immediately tried to take physical control of the situation. She stepped between Sabrina and me, positioning her back to the crowd. She reached out and clamped her hands onto my upper arms, digging her fingers in with bruising force. She intended to physically march me backward toward the exit doors, relying on my lifelong habit of quiet compliance to avoid making a public scene. "Erica, honey," Linda said loudly, projecting her voice so the nearby high society guests would hear her performance. "You are clearly confused. Your medications are not working. We need to get you home right now before you hurt yourself or someone else. Come with Mommy. We will get you the help you desperately need." It was the classic concerned mother dealing with a sick daughter routine. It was the exact same script she had used to gaslight me and isolate me for decades. She expected me to lower my head in shame and let her herd me out the door. She expected the wealthy onlookers to pity her for having such a burdensome, unstable child. I did not move a single inch. Instead of fighting her physically, I flipped the script entirely. I used the one thing my family feared more than anything else in the world: public attention. "Please do not touch me, Linda," I said. My voice was completely calm, incredibly polite, and absolutely booming. It carried over the string quartet and echoed across the nearest tables. "I am perfectly healthy and I do not need your help leaving." The conversations around us abruptly stopped. A dozen wealthy investors, including several prominent local politicians and banking executives, turned to look directly at us. They saw Linda aggressively grabbing a poised, impeccably dressed woman who was speaking with absolute terrifying clarity. Linda instantly dropped her hands, terrified of the judgmental stares from her peers. The illusion of her loving maternal concern evaporated under the harsh lighting of public scrutiny. She took a step back, her face flushing bright red as murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. "We just want you to be safe," Linda stammered, her voice dropping to a frantic, begging whisper. "Please, Erica, just walk away. We will give you whatever you want." I ignored her. My attention was focused entirely on Sabrina. My younger sister was hyperventilating. Her eyes darted wildly around the ballroom, landing on the wealthy clients she had robbed, the father whose firm she had destroyed, and the fiancé who had no idea his entire business was funded by federal wire fraud. She looked at the ornate clock on the ballroom wall. It was nearing 9 in the evening. Sabrina realized her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. She had originally planned to execute the offshore transfer during the charity auction at 10 o'clock, using the noise and excitement as a distraction. But I had just accelerated her timeline. She believed I was going to walk up to the microphone and expose her at any second. She thought if she could just get to her laptop in the private VIP lounge, she could hit confirm on the transaction, secure the remaining millions in an untraceable account, and flee the country before anyone could stop her. She did not realize I had anticipated this exact reaction. I had engineered this entire confrontation simply to induce a state of absolute blind panic. Panic makes people stupid. Panic makes people rush into making catastrophic mistakes. "I cannot do this." Sabrina gasped, her voice cracking as she stumbled backward. I have to go. I have to fix this right now. Sabrina, wait. Thomas urged, finally finding his voice. Do not leave the floor. People are watching us. But Sabrina was completely beyond reason. She turned and practically sprinted away from us, shoving past a waiter carrying a tray of champagne glasses. The tray crashed to the floor, shattering crystal across the polished hardwood, but Sabrina did not even look back. She hiked up the skirt of her heavy bridal gown and ran toward the hallway that led to the private secured VIP lounge. She abandoned her parents. She abandoned her fiancé Colin, who was waving at her from across the room. She abandoned her own engagement party to try and save her stolen fortune. Linda buried her face in her hands, realizing the social embarrassment of the shattered glasses, and her fleeing daughter was entirely unrecoverable. Thomas stared after Sabrina, the reality of his total ruin finally sinking deep into his bones. I stood perfectly still amidst the wreckage of their dignity. I watched Sabrina's white silk dress disappear around the corner of the long hallway. I waited 3 seconds, letting the satisfaction of the moment wash through my veins. Then I reached up and tapped the small, discreet earpiece hidden beneath my structured hairstyle. I spoke clearly into the hidden microphone, communicating directly with my business partner David, who was sitting in a surveillance van parked just outside the country club gates alongside the federal strike team. The rabbit is in the trap. I said, a slow, predatory smile touching the corners of my mouth. She is heading for the terminal now. Initiate the screen override. I lowered my hand from my earpiece and smoothed the front of my emerald gown. The Crestwood Country Club ballroom was a symphony of oblivious privilege. Wealthy investors clinked crystal champagne flutes and laughed at polite jokes, while the string quartet played a soft classical arrangement in the corner. My father stood near the ice sculpture, looking utterly paralyzed. My mother was still frozen in her tracks, desperately trying to maintain her social smile while her eyes betrayed pure terror. They had spent my entire life silencing me to protect this exact room full of people. Now I was going to use this very room to destroy them. I walked past the bewildered security guards and made my way directly toward the elevated main stage at the front of the ballroom. A massive projector screen hung above the stage, currently cycling through a saccharine, perfectly curated slideshow of Sabrina and Colin, smiling on various tropical beaches and holding up expensive glasses of wine. It was a monument to their fake perfect life. I climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the stage without rushing. The fabric of my dress flowed smoothly behind me. A young audio-visual technician sat at a small mixing table near the stairs, looking confused as I approached the main microphone stand. He opened his mouth to tell me the toasts were not scheduled for another hour. I did not give him the chance to speak. I reached out and gently took the microphone from the stand. The soft thump of my fingers wrapping around the metal casing echoed through the massive speakers positioned around the perimeter of the room. A few heads turned in my direction, but most of the guests continued their conversations, assuming I was just an eager relative wanting to give an early speech. I held the microphone close to my mouth and looked out over the sea of expensive suits and designer dresses. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the massive space. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of chatter died away as hundreds of faces turned to look at the woman in the emerald dress, standing alone on the stage. My father took a frantic step forward, his face draining of whatever color it had left, but he was too far away to stop me. I am Erica, the older sister of the bride-to-be. I continued scanning the crowd until I locked eyes with my mother. Some of you might have heard recently that I am suffering from a severe mental breakdown. You might have heard that I am missing or dangerous or pathologically jealous of my sister. I paused, letting the silence stretch tightly across the room. I assure you I am entirely in my right mind, and I am not here to give a toast. I am here to give an audit. I tapped the side of my phone screen twice, sending the final signal to David waiting in the surveillance van outside. The romantic slideshow of Sabrina and Colin abruptly vanished from the massive projector screen above my head. The screen went completely black for a fraction of a second. Then it flared back to life, illuminating the entire stage in a harsh blue glow. The romantic photos were gone. In their place, a highly detailed real-time mirror of the family investment firm's central banking ledger was projected in massive high-definition text for everyone in the room to see. Gasps rippled through the front rows as the guests recognized the familiar letterhead of my father's firm. But this was not the sanitized quarterly report they were used to receiving in the mail. This was the raw, unfiltered back-end administrative dashboard. "Do not adjust your glasses," I said, my voice carrying a hard, authoritative edge. "You are looking at the actual uncensored transaction logs for the primary investment portfolios, managed by my father Thomas and his executive team. And if you look closely at the highlighted columns, you will notice a rather concerning pattern." I pointed to the screen where David was currently highlighting specific offshore routing numbers in bright red. "Over the past 36 months, $15 million has been systematically siphoned out of your collective retirement accounts and corporate investment portfolios. The money did not disappear due to market fluctuations. It was deliberately rerouted through a labyrinth of phantom vendor accounts and fake consulting fees. And every single one of those fake accounts leads directly to offshore shell companies controlled by the woman you are all here to celebrate tonight, Sabrina." The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked murmurs and angry whispers. Men in tailored suits pushed their way closer to the stage, squinting at the massive screen. Women clutched their pearls, pointing at the specific dates and transfer amounts rolling across the projection. David began cycling through the ledger, isolating individual client portfolios and displaying the exact amounts that had been stolen from them. I saw a prominent local judge drop his champagne glass when his own name flashed on the screen next to a missing $500,000. I saw a commercial real estate developer grab his chest as he realized his entire liquid savings had been funneled into the failing tech startup owned by Sabrina's fiancé. "You trusted my father with your financial futures," I told the crowd, raising my voice to cut through the rising panic. "He sold you a promise of security and exclusivity. But while you were invited to his country club dinners and golf tournaments, his golden child was treating your life savings as her personal piggy bank to fund her designer wardrobe, her luxury vacations, and the $50,000 couture dress she wore to this very party tonight." Thomas finally broke out of his paralyzed state. He lunged toward the stage, his face twisted in absolute desperation. "Turn that off," he screamed at the young technician sitting by the mixing board. "Cut the power right now." The technician scrambled to pull the main plug from the wall, but the screen remained brightly illuminated. David had completely bypassed the local hardware and locked the projection system into an overriding loop from the van. My father realized the plug did nothing and tried to scramble up the stage stairs. "Shut your mouth, Erica!" he roared, his voice cracking with panic. "Do not listen to her. The documents are fake. She hacked the system to frame us because she is sick. She is a sick, jealous liar." I looked down at my father scrambling up the stairs toward me, and I felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no intimidation, no desire to shrink away. I was completely immune to him. I took a step back from the edge of the stage and looked back at the crowd. "My father claims I'm a liar," I said, my voice ringing with total clarity. "He claims I'm fabricating this out of jealousy. Let us look at what happened when I first discovered these missing funds last Tuesday in his office." I tapped my phone screen one more time. The financial ledgers on the massive projector shrank to the left side of the screen. On the right side, a stark black and white medical image appeared. It was the high-resolution emergency room X-ray of my left arm, showing the jagged spiral fractures of my ulna and the severe bone contusions. The contrast between the sterile medical image and the opulent ballroom was incredibly jarring. The crowd fell dead silent again, staring at the broken bones projected 20 feet high. "My sister did not push me down the stairs by accident," I told the room, holding up my left arm wrapped in its sleek black silk covering. "I did not trip over a rug." Sabrina shattered my arm by swinging a heavy solid bronze equestrian statue directly at my head. "She tried to cave my skull in because I caught her stealing your money to pay for this party, and I threatened to expose her. She broke my arm to silence me. And my parents stood in the hospital trauma bay and threatened to destroy my entire life if I told the police the truth." Linda finally snapped. She pushed her way to the front of the stage, her face a mess of smeared makeup and pure panic. "She is insane," Linda shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She did that to herself. We tried to help her. We tried to get her psychiatric care. Thomas is right. The documents are forged. She is trying to ruin us because we cut her off. She is extorting us." The guests looked back and forth between my parents and the massive screen, clearly torn between the wealthy family they thought they knew and the overwhelming evidence presented in front of them. The confusion in the room was palpable. They needed the final nail in the coffin to completely shatter the illusion my parents were desperately trying to cling to. "It is truly remarkable how committed you are to this performance, Mom," I said, shaking my head slowly. "But you forgot one very important detail. I am a forensic accountant. I document everything." I raised my phone to the microphone and pressed play on the audio file I had saved just a few days prior. The crystal-clear audio of my father's unhinged voicemail blasted through the country club speakers, echoing off the chandeliers and washing over the horrified crowd. "You think you are so smart, Erica?" My father's recorded voice snarled, dripping with unfiltered rage and panic. "You think a petty counter-lawsuit is going to save you? You have no idea what you have just done. You are dead to this family. Do you hear me? Dead. I am pouring the entire weight of our family fortune into crushing you in court. I am hiring the most vicious litigators in the state. We are going to drag this out until you are bankrupt, living on the streets and begging us for a handout. You will be left with absolutely nothing. You are a failure, and I will make sure everyone knows it." The voicemail ended with a sharp click, leaving an oppressive, heavy silence in its wake. The recording was impossible to deny. It was not the voice of a concerned father dealing with a sick daughter. It was the frantic, vicious threat of a cornered criminal trying to silence a witness through intimidation and financial ruin. The high society guests instantly turned on Thomas and Linda. The polite restraint of the wealthy vanished entirely, replaced by the primal fury of people who realized they had been conned out of millions. The judge, who had dropped his glass, marched directly up to Thomas, his face purple with rage. "Where is my money, Thomas?" the judge demanded, grabbing my father by the lapels of his expensive suit. "Where is my retirement fund, you thief?" Other investors surged forward, surrounding my parents in a tight, angry circle. They shouted demands for their money, hurling insults and accusations. Linda backed up against the stage, completely trapped by the furious crowd, weeping openly as the women she had played tennis with yesterday now screamed in her face. Thomas tried to push them back, stammering pathetic excuses about market fluctuations and temporary holds, but nobody was listening to him anymore. The illusion of his power was dead. I stood on the stage, looking down at the chaos I had orchestrated. I watched the people who had protected my abusers turn into their executioners. I did not feel an ounce of pity for my parents as they were swallowed by the angry mob. I took a deep breath of the air in the room, feeling a profound sense of closure. But the night was not over yet. I looked toward the back hallway where Sabrina had fled, knowing she was currently locking herself in the VIP lounge to make her final desperate move. I knew exactly what was happening at the end of that long, carpeted corridor. Inside the exclusive wood-paneled VIP lounge, my sister was collapsing into a leather desk chair. I could perfectly picture her trembling hands ripping open the clasp of her designer clutch to retrieve the two-factor authentication token she kept hidden inside. The heavy oak door was locked behind her, separating her from the catastrophic implosion of her engagement party. She only needed 60 seconds to log into the administrative portal, bypass standard security protocols, and authorize the massive wire transfer. She was typing frantically, her expensive acrylic nails clattering against the keys of her laptop. She was sweating through the bodice of her $50,000 couture gown, her perfect makeup ruined by tears of absolute terror. She accessed the Cayman Islands routing numbers using the familiar interface she used dozens of times before to steal from the people currently shouting at our parents. She entered the $15 million amount. She typed in her executive authorization password. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes as she brought her finger down on the trackpad. She clicked confirm. I knew the exact second she did it, because David had hardwired my earpiece to ping the moment the administrative server received her command. A soft, high-pitched chime sounded in my right ear. Sabrina had just pulled the trigger. Down the hall, she was letting out a massive, shuddering sigh of relief, believing she had just successfully washed her stolen fortune across international borders. She thought she had won. She thought she had outsmarted me one final time and secured her luxurious future at the expense of everyone else in this room. But the green processing bar on her laptop screen did not slide smoothly to 100%. It stopped dead at 99. Inside the ballroom, the massive projector screen hanging above the stage mirrored her exact digital interface. The entire crowd of furious investors suddenly went completely quiet as the screen froze. My father stopped trying to push his way through the angry mob and stared up at the projection, his chest heaving. My mother stood frozen against the stage, skirting her hands clamped tightly over her mouth. For 2 agonizingly long seconds, the progress bar hung in digital limbo, teasing the room with unbearable tension. Then the pristine white background of the banking portal abruptly vanished. The massive projector screen and Sabrina's laptop down the hall simultaneously flashed a blinding aggressive crimson red. The color bathed the entire ballroom in the harsh light of a warning siren, painting the shocked faces of the elite guests in a bloody hue. Bold black text materialized across the center of the projection in massive block letters. Transfer blocked funds seized by Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence in the ballroom shattered. The collective gasp from the high society guests sounded like all the oxygen was suddenly sucked out of the room. The commercial real estate developer, who had been shouting at my father just moments ago, pointed a shaking finger at the red screen, his jaw unhinged. The local judge let out a sharp bark of disbelief. The absolute finality of those words hung over the crowd, sealing the fate of the family investment firm forever. The money was not just missing, it was locked down by the federal government. My custom script had worked with absolute perfection. It had caught Sabrina's offshore routing request, swallowed the $15 million whole, and redirected every single penny into Agent Miller's secure holding account. Sabrina had not just failed to hide the money. She had effectively gift-wrapped her own confession, handed it directly to the feds on a silver platter, and provided the digital fingerprint required for a watertight federal indictment. A raw, guttural scream echoed down the long hallway leading to the VIP lounge. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony tearing from my sister's throat as she stared at the glowing red screen on her laptop. The sound pierced through the heavy oak doors and carried into the main ballroom, cutting through the shocked murmurs of the investors. It was the horrific sound of a privileged woman realizing her entire life of luxury and entitlement was completely over. On the ballroom floor, my father's legs simply gave out. Thomas collapsed, dropping hard onto his knees, hitting the polished hardwood floor with a heavy thud that I could feel through the soles of my shoes. He did not try to catch himself or stand back up. He knelt there amidst the shattered glass of the dropped champagne flutes, his custom-tailored suit pooling around him like a deflated parachute. He stared blankly ahead, totally defeated. He knew the FBI seizure meant his firm was done, his assets would be frozen, and his personal freedom was about to be severely curtailed. Linda scrambled toward him, dropping to the floor beside him and clutching his arm, but he did not even look at her. The illusion of their invincible suburban empire was reduced to ash in front of their most important peers. Then a heavy mechanical thud echoed through the room. The massive brass locks on the main ballroom doors engaged simultaneously, sealing the room shut from the outside. Security protocols had been initiated, but not by the country club staff. The guests began to murmur nervously, looking toward the exits as they realized they were locked inside. I remained standing calmly on the elevated stage, looking down at my parents weeping on the floor. I felt the steady, powerful hum of pure vindication coursing through my veins. The trap had snapped shut with absolute flawless precision. Through the towering stained glass windows lining the eastern wall of the ballroom, Sudden flashes of red and blue began to pulse frantically against the night sky. The rhythmic strobing lights illuminated the dark glass, casting distorted, colorful shadows across the terrified faces of the guests. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder, cutting through the manicured silence of the grounds. It was not just one police cruiser responding to a noise complaint, it was an entire tactical fleet. Dozens of heavily armored vehicles were swarming the long circular driveway, blocking all the exits and locking down the perimeter of the sprawling estate. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom suddenly unlocked with a sharp, mechanical click. The doors were shoved open with commanding force, banging loudly against the interior walls. Detective Hayes strode into the room dressed in a sharp, dark suit, his silver badge prominently displayed on his belt. Behind him, a highly coordinated team of federal agents clad in tactical gear and windbreakers poured into the elegant space. The visual impact of federal law enforcement storming an elite high society engagement gala was staggering. The agents moved with precise, practiced efficiency, securing the exits and scanning the crowd. The angry mob of investors immediately parted, scrambling backward to create a wide, clear path for the authorities. Nobody wanted to accidentally obstruct a federal raid. Detective Hayes walked straight down the center aisle, his eyes scanning the room until he locked onto my father, kneeling pitifully on the floor. Agent Miller followed closely behind him, holding a thick stack of printed warrants in his hand. The reality of the situation crashed over the room in heavy, suffocating waves. This was not a simple misunderstanding or a minor civil dispute. This was a full-scale criminal takedown executed on the grandest stage possible. As the federal agents quickly secured the perimeter of the ballroom, Sabrina's fiancé, Colin, finally connected the devastating dots. He had been standing near the melting ice sculpture, looking bewildered as the financial ledgers flashed across the projector screen. He watched his own failing tech startup highlighted as the primary recipient of millions of dollars in stolen retirement funds. The color completely drained from his face as he realized his entire business model, his entire impending marriage, and his entire lavish lifestyle were funded entirely by corporate wire fraud. He realized that marrying Sabrina would not save his company. It would drag him directly into a federal indictment as an active accessory to a massive crime. Self-preservation kicked in with ruthless, terrifying speed. Colin did not run toward the ballroom doors to check on my weeping parents. He bolted in the exact opposite direction, sprinting down the hallway toward the VIP lounge where Sabrina was still screaming in terror. He reached the heavy oak door just as two FBI agents were approaching it from the other side holding zip ties. Colin practically threw himself against the wood-paneled wall, raising his hands high in the air to show he was absolutely not a threat to the approaching officers. He looked at the agents sweating profusely and pointed a shaking finger at the lounge door. "I have absolutely nothing to do with this." Colin shouted, his voice echoing loudly down the hall for everyone in the main ballroom to clearly hear. "I am not marrying her. I did not know where the money came from. I thought she had a trust fund. She lied to me about everything. Please, I will tell you whatever you want to know, just keep me out of jail." He abandoned her without a single second of hesitation, throwing the woman he had promised to marry straight to the wolves to save his own miserable skin. Colin's desperate confession hung in the air for only a fraction of a second before the two federal agents brushed right past his trembling frame. They pushed open the heavy oak doors of the VIP lounge with decisive force. I stepped down from the elevated stage and walked slowly down the center aisle of the ballroom, following the path the agents had cleared. I wanted a front row seat to the exact moment my sister's delusion shattered completely. Through the open doorway of the lounge, I watched as an agent firmly grasped Sabrina by the shoulder. She thrashed wildly, her $50,000 custom bridal gown, knocking over a side table and sending a decorative lamp crashing to the carpet. The exquisite imported lace tore against the sharp edge of the mahogany desk. As they forcefully pulled her arms behind her back, the harsh, metallic ratcheting sound of the heavy steel handcuffs clicking shut around her wrists echoed clearly down the corridor. It was an absolutely beautiful sound. "Mom." Sabrina shrieked, her voice cracking into a raw, hysterical wail that pierced the air. "Dad, do something. Tell them to stop. Fix this. Fix it right now." But Thomas and Linda could not fix anything. Back in the main ballroom, Detective Hayes was standing over them. He did not offer my father the professional courtesy of a quiet exit. He pulled my parents up from the floor, his grip unyielding. Thomas and Linda were spun around and handcuffed right in front of the massive projector screen that was still displaying their monumental financial crimes in bright glowing red text. "Thomas, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and acting as an accessory after the fact." Detective Hayes announced, his voice carrying clearly over the dead silence of the room. He recited the Miranda rights with practiced efficiency, each word landing like a physical blow on my parents. Linda was hyperventilating, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands across her tear-streaked face as the cold steel locked around her wrists. The architects of my lifelong misery were finally being bound by the very system they thought they were above. As the federal agents began marching my parents and Sabrina toward the main exit, a sudden frantic shift rippled through the remaining crowd. The wealthy investors stepped back in disgust, but my extended family members reacted entirely differently. These were the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had spent the last 2 weeks flooding my phone with hateful, venomous text messages. They had called me toxic, unhinged, and ungrateful. They had demanded I drop the police investigation and check myself into a psychiatric ward to protect the family name. But now the reality of the situation had finally pierced their thick skulls. The massive projector screen had shown them that Sabrina was washing their own trust funds and investment accounts offshore. They suddenly realized that the sister they had viciously demonized was actually a highly successful millionaire forensic accountant who had just single-handedly intercepted a $15 million transfer. I had just saved every remaining cent of their investments from vanishing into the Cayman Islands. The hypocrisy was instantaneous and entirely sickening. Aunt Patricia, the woman who had sent me a long paragraph calling me a miserable spinster just days ago, broke away from the crowd and rushed toward me. Her face was arranged in a mask of frantic, desperate affection. "Erica! Oh my God, Erica!" Patricia gasped, reaching out to grab my hands. "We had no idea. Thomas and Linda lied to us. They manipulated the entire family. You have to believe us. We always knew something was wrong with Sabrina. We are so incredibly proud of you for stopping them. You saved our retirement funds." My cousin Brian pushed his way forward, nodding aggressively. "We are so sorry about the messages, Erica. We were just trying to keep the peace. You know we always loved you. We are family. We have to stick together now more than ever." They swarmed me, a dozen relatives suddenly treating me like their ultimate savior. They smiled their fake smiles, their eyes darting to my custom emerald gown and the platinum VIP investor badge I still held in my hand. They saw my wealth, my power, and my undeniable leverage. They were terrified I would leave their remaining portfolios twisting in the wind during the impending federal liquidation process. They were begging for my forgiveness, offering cheap excuses and conditional love they thought I was still desperate to earn. I looked at their frantic, pleading faces. A decade ago, I would have craved this exact validation. I would have accepted their hollow apologies just to feel like I belonged. But standing there in the wreckage of their high society gala, I felt absolutely nothing for them. They were total strangers to me now. I did not yell. I did not hurl insults or demand further apologies. I simply pulled my hands away from Aunt Patricia's grasp as if her touch physically burned my skin. My face remained a mask of pure absolute stone. "Excuse me," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I stepped forward, brushing past my aunt and my cousins as if they were entirely invisible. They scrambled out of my way, stunned by the sheer freezing coldness of my rejection. I did not look back at them even once. I had absolutely no use for their conditional love. I did not need their approval, their apologies, or their presence in my life. I walked smoothly across the polished hardwood floor, my posture immaculate, heading directly toward the main lobby, where the police were currently staging their prisoners. The flashing red and blue lights from the dozens of cruisers parked outside spilled through the glass doors, painting the elegant foyer in chaotic colors. Sabrina was already being shoved into the back of a federal transport vehicle, her screaming muffled by the heavy doors slamming shut. She was completely separated from the luxury and comfort she had sacrificed her soul to maintain. My father was the last one being let out. Two federal agents held him firmly by his arms, guiding his shackled wrists toward the exit. He looked completely aged, his shoulders slumped, and his expensive suit rumpled beyond repair. As they walked him toward the doors, Thomas caught sight of me standing calmly near the coat check. He suddenly dug his heels into the carpet, resisting the agents pulling him forward. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a sudden pathetic burst of hope. He knew exactly what kind of financial resources I commanded now. He knew I had the capital to hire the most ruthless criminal defense attorneys in the country. He knew I could post an astronomical bail without blinking. "Erica, wait. Please. Erica, listen to me." Thomas begged, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. He strained against the officers trying to lean toward me. "I know I said terrible things. I know I was wrong. But I am your father. You have the money. You have the connections. You have to help us post bail. You have to help your mother. We are still blood, Erica. Please do not turn your back on your own blood." I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still, letting the weight of his desperate plea hang in the damp night air blowing through the open doors. I looked at the man who had ordered me to lie about a shattered arm to protect a criminal. The man who had threatened to render me homeless and destitute just hours ago. He was begging the very daughter he had spent a lifetime trying to break. I walked slowly toward him. The federal agents tightened their grip on his arms, but they paused, allowing me to approach the prisoner. I stopped just inches from my father's face. I looked directly into his terrified, pleading eyes with absolute, unwavering indifference. I did not feel a single drop of pity. I leaned in close, letting the silence stretch for one final agonizing second. "You chose your golden child," I whispered, my voice, a lethal, quiet promise that only he could hear. "Now you get to share her cell." I straightened my posture, turned my back on him, and walked straight out the heavy double doors of the country club. I glided past the police cruisers and the stunned onlookers, stepping smoothly into the cool, refreshing night air, leaving my family to face their total destruction entirely alone. The gravel crunched softly beneath my heels as I made my way down the long driveway toward my waiting car. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely unburdened. I had survived their cruelty. I had dismantled their lies. I had taken back my power. And I had won. My driver opened the door. I slid into the leather seat, ready to begin my absolutely beautiful brand new life today. The morning after the country club raid, the city woke up to a seismic financial scandal that completely consumed the 24-hour news cycle. I sat in the sunlit breakfast nook of my estate, sipping a freshly brewed espresso, while watching my family's legacy disintegrate on live television. The federal government did not waste a single second. By noon, a fleet of moving trucks and federal agents had descended upon the downtown headquarters of my father's investment firm. They carried out boxes of physical ledgers, confiscated every hard drive, and padlocked the heavy glass doors. The firm was immediately placed under federal receivership and liquidated to begin paying back the victims of Sabrina's massive embezzlement scheme. Local news anchors stood on the sidewalk outside the seized building, detailing the shocking $15 million fraud that had funded my sister's lavish lifestyle. They interviewed elderly couples who had lost their entire life savings, crying on camera about the betrayal. The public outrage was swift and merciless, demanding maximum sentences for the executives. The social fallout was absolutely catastrophic. My parents had spent 3 decades meticulously cultivating an image of untouchable upper-class superiority. They had ruthlessly judged everyone around them, gatekeeping their elite circles and pretending to be the arbiters of suburban morality. Now their faces were plastered across the front pages of newspapers and digital media outlets, under bold headlines declaring them corporate thieves. The very people they used to host at their extravagant dinner parties were now eagerly giving interviews to journalists, expressing their utter disgust and claiming they always knew there was something suspicious about Thomas and Linda. The country club immediately revoked their membership. The charity boards my mother had clawed her way onto publicly severed all ties, releasing press statements condemning her actions. Their entire social standing was vaporized overnight, replaced by a toxic cloud of scandal that no amount of public relations spin could ever fix. They were social pariahs completely exiled from the world they had sacrificed their own daughter to impress. The financial destruction was even more severe than the social exile. The federal prosecutors successfully argued that my parents' personal wealth was hopelessly entangled with the stolen client funds. Consequently, a federal judge ordered an immediate and total freeze on all their known assets. Their bank accounts were locked, their credit cards were canceled, their luxury vehicles were repossessed right out of the country club parking lot. The massive, pristine estate where I had grown up, the fortress of pale walls and cold expectations, was seized by the government to be sold at auction. Thomas and Linda were granted bail, but without access to their millions, they were suddenly thrust into a harsh reality they had spent their entire lives mocking. I received the updates through my attorney Diane. She informed me that my parents, stripped of their wealth and abandoned by their high society friends, had been forced to move into a cheap, rundown motel on the outskirts of the city while awaiting their federal trial. I could vividly imagine my mother, a woman who once threw a fit because a five-star hotel used the wrong thread count on her sheets, sitting on a sagging mattress in a room that smelled of stale smoke and bleach. I pictured my father, who wore custom Italian suits and drank scotch that cost more than a mortgage payment, staring at peeling wallpaper and a flickering fluorescent light. They had to learn how to exist without private chefs, housekeepers, or personal assistants. They were forced to eat cheap fast food and wear the same clothes for days because their designer wardrobes had been locked inside the seized estate. The golden facade of their suburban royalty was entirely stripped away, exposing the pathetic, bankrupt reality beneath. They were finally experiencing the exact kind of helpless, terrifying vulnerability they had so casually inflicted upon me when they threatened to throw me out on the street. While Thomas and Linda navigated the indignity of their cheap motel, Sabrina faced a much harsher reckoning. During her arraignment, the federal prosecutors presented the digital evidence I had provided, alongside flight risk assessments based on the offshore accounts she had tried to access. The judge took one look at her desperate attempt to wire $15 million to the Cayman Islands during her own engagement party and immediately denied bail. Sabrina, the pampered golden child, who had never faced a single consequence in her entire 29 years of existence, was remanded to a federal holding cell. She was stripped of her expensive hair extensions, her manicures, and her false sense of superiority. She traded her $50,000 couture bridal gown for a stiff, scratchy orange jumpsuit. According to the court filings Diane shared with me, Sabrina was facing up to 15 years in federal prison for aggravated wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The reality of her situation was compounded by the ultimate betrayal. Colin, the fiancé she had stolen millions to impress, did not even attempt to stand by her side. Within 48 hours of the country club raid, Colin's lawyers struck a comprehensive immunity deal with the federal prosecutors. He officially severed all ties with Sabrina, publicly claiming he was a victim of her deception. He turned over every document related to his failing tech startup and eagerly agreed to testify against her in court to save himself. Sabrina was completely isolated, trapped in a cold, concrete cell, without her designer clothes, her stolen money, or the man she had destroyed her family to marry. She was finally paying the price for her unhinged greed and the violent assault she committed to protect it. I absorbed all of these updates from the absolute comfort of my hidden $4 million estate. For the first time in 33 years, the chronic, suffocating anxiety that had always lived in the back of my mind was completely gone. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for orchestrating their downfall. I felt the profound, grounding peace of a long overdue justice. I spent my mornings walking through my private gardens, breathing in the crisp air, and my afternoons managing my highly successful forensic accounting firm. My business was actually booming. The news of my role in taking down a corrupt investment firm had solidified my reputation as an apex predator in the financial sector. Federal agencies and massive corporate clients were beating down my door to hire my team. I was surrounded by genuine success built entirely on my own merit and relentless hard work. I had dismantled the toxic architecture of my past and erected a brilliant, uncompromised life in its place. The nightmares of my father's heavy hand and my sister's cruel laughter had vanished, replaced by the quiet certainty of my own power. 3 weeks after the country club raid, I was sitting at my kitchen island enjoying a late morning coffee when my private security team brought in the day's mail. Among the neat stack of business correspondence and financial reports was a wrinkled, cheap paper envelope. It bore no return address, but I recognized the frantic, slanted handwriting immediately. It was from my mother. The federal investigators had likely released my decoy condo address during the discovery phase, and she had forwarded it through the postal system. I picked up a silver letter opener, sliced the envelope open, and unfolded the single sheet of lined notebook paper inside. The letter was a pathetic, desperate masterpiece of manipulation. Linda wrote about how cold the motel was, how my father was struggling to breathe through his panic attacks, and how Sabrina was crying herself to sleep every night in jail. She begged me to remember that we were blood. She pleaded with me to use my vast, newly discovered wealth to hire them a decent defense attorney. She claimed they had learned their lesson and promised they would make everything right if I just gave them one more chance. She ended the letter by telling me she loved me and that a daughter could not simply abandon her mother in her darkest hour. I read the desperate words twice, letting the sheer audacity of her request wash over me. She really believed she could still pull my strings. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark flavor. I stood up from the kitchen island, walked calmly over to the heavy-duty industrial paper shredder I kept in my home office, and dropped the letter into the slot without a single second of hesitation. The machine hummed to life, grinding her desperate pleas into meaningless confetti. The heavy industrial shredder swallowed my mother's desperate letter and ground it into fine paper dust. The machine hummed to a quiet stop, and I returned to my desk to face the reality of the coming weeks. The federal prosecutors had formally issued a subpoena, compelling me to testify as their primary expert witness against my own parents and sister. They did not just want my testimony as a victim of a violent physical assault. They needed me to break down the complex financial web my sister had woven through the family business. I sat across a large metal table from Agent Miller and the lead federal prosecutor, meticulously reviewing the digital timeline I had extracted from my father's servers. We drank terrible black coffee and traced every single stolen dollar from its origin point in a client retirement account through the phantom vendor ledgers and straight into Sabrina's offshore shell companies. I ensured my forensic accounting reports were absolutely bulletproof. I anticipated every possible defense strategy their highly paid lawyers might attempt to use to create reasonable doubt. The prosecutors were amazed by the precision of the data. They told me they had never been handed a corporate white-collar crime case wrapped so perfectly in undeniable mathematical proof. My testimony was going to be the lethal strike that secured their convictions. While I was busy fortifying the government case, my extended family was experiencing a profound and devastating financial collapse. For decades, my aunts, uncles, and cousins had relied heavily on my father to manage their wealth. They had enjoyed preferential interest rates, luxury kickbacks, and questionable tax loopholes provided by his firm. With the firm now under federal receivership and its assets entirely frozen to compensate the victims, my relatives found themselves completely cut off from their lifeblood. The luxurious lifestyles they had taken for granted began to evaporate before their eyes. My cousin Brian faced immediate foreclosure on his sprawling vacation home and had to pull his children out of their elite private schools. Aunt Patricia, who had once called me a miserable spinster in a hateful text message, found herself unable to pay her massive country club dues or her luxury car leases. Realizing I was the only person in the family with liquid capital and an untarnished reputation, they desperately tried to reach me. They flooded my company switchboard with frantic calls begging for emergency bailouts and short-term loans to save their sinking estates. They sent long emotional emails apologizing for their past behavior and pleading for financial salvation, claiming we needed to stick together. I did not read a single one of them. David, my business partner, stepped in as my absolute gatekeeper. He instructed our firm's security and reception staff to intercept every communication from anyone sharing my last name. When Brian tried to ambush David in the lobby of our office building, David calmly threatened him with criminal harassment charges and had security throw him out onto the pavement. David strictly enforced a comprehensive block on all their phone numbers and email addresses. They were completely shut out in the cold, left to navigate their self-inflicted ruin without a fraction of my help. I walked up the wide stone steps of the federal courthouse wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit that projected total authority and calm confidence. I bypassed the swarm of local reporters gathered near the entrance and made my way through the heavy security checkpoints. I entered the cavernous wood-paneled courtroom and took my designated seat in the front row of the gallery. I sat tall, keeping my posture perfect and my expression completely unbothered. A few moments later, the heavy side doors opened and the defendants were led into the room by armed guards. Thomas and Linda walked in first. They looked utterly depleted. My father's posture was stooped and the cheap off-the-rack suit he wore hung loosely on his shrinking frame. My mother kept her head bowed, hiding her unstyled hair and pale makeup-free face from the scattered press sitting in the gallery behind me. Then Sabrina was escorted into the room by a federal marshal. The transformation was truly shocking. The glamorous, arrogant golden child was entirely gone. She was dressed in a drab, oversized prison uniform that swallowed her figure. Her expensive hair extensions had been removed, leaving her natural hair looking thin and unwashed. The vibrant glow of her expensive skincare routines had faded into a sickly pale complexion illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. She looked incredibly small and terrified as she shuffled forward in her standard-issue canvas shoes. As she took her seat at the defendant table, she turned her head and caught sight of me sitting comfortably in the gallery. A flash of pure, helpless hatred crossed her face. She glared at me, her eyes dark and hollow, but I simply stared back with calm, icy indifference. I was completely untouchable. The federal judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for corporate criminals, called the court to order. The preliminary hearing was meant to establish the trial schedule and address any pending motions from the defense teams. I watched as my father's defense attorney stood up nervously, adjusting his tie, and requested permission to approach the bench. He announced to the silent courtroom that his client Thomas had a formal proposition for the federal prosecutors. The attorney stated that Thomas was prepared to offer a comprehensive plea deal to the court right now. He was willing to provide full cooperation and testify under oath against his own daughter. My father was offering to tell the jury that Sabrina had acted entirely alone, manipulating the firm's ledgers without his knowledge and deceiving the executive board for years. He claimed he was just an innocent victim of her sophisticated cyber manipulation. He was actively trying to frame her as a rogue, malicious employee to secure a lighter sentence for himself and my mother. The sheer cowardice of the move sent a shockwave through the courtroom, causing the reporters behind me to frantically scribble in their notebooks. He was throwing his beloved golden child directly under the bus to save his own skin. The lead federal prosecutor did not even bother to look at the paperwork the defense attorney was holding out. He stood up tall and flatly rejected the offer on the public record. He announced clearly that the government had zero need for Thomas's testimony. The prosecutor noted that Thomas's own signature was already on the forged audit reports. The forensic accounting files I had provided were so devastatingly complete and so meticulously detailed that the prosecution already had enough hard evidence to convict every single one of them for conspiracy and fraud. They did not need a rat to make their case. Sabrina sat frozen at the defense table as the prosecutor's confident words echoed off the high ceiling. She slowly turned her head to look at her father sitting just a few feet away from her. The realization hit her with the crushing, unavoidable force of a freight train. The parents who had spoiled her, protected her, and allowed her to brutally abuse me for her entire life were perfectly willing to sacrifice her to a federal prison to save themselves. Her status as the golden child only mattered when she was a shining reflection of their success. The exact moment she became a legal liability, they discarded her exactly like they had discarded me for 33 years. Something deep inside Sabrina completely snapped. She leaped up from her chair, her metal handcuffs rattling loudly against the heavy wooden table. She started screaming at our father, her voice raw and hysterical, tearing through the quiet decorum of the courtroom. Her face turned a blotchy purple as tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining what was left of her composure. She cursed him, calling him a coward and a liar for abandoning her. She shouted that he knew exactly where the stolen money was going and had explicitly encouraged her to hide it to protect his quarterly profit margins. Linda tried to reach across the table to silence her crying and begging her daughter to stop making a terrible scene. Sabrina turned her unhinged fury onto our mother, screaming that she hated her for turning her into this monster. The federal marshals immediately rushed forward to restrain Sabrina, pushing her forcefully back into her chair as she continued to thrash and wail against their grip. The judge began striking her wooden gavel repeatedly, demanding order in the court and threatening to hold them all in criminal contempt. I sat silently in this gallery, watching the entire toxic family dynamic implode in spectacular, devastating fashion. They had turned into a pack of starving wolves, viciously tearing each other apart in front of a federal judge and a gallery full of witnesses. I watched them destroy themselves, knowing my victory was absolute and final. The spectacular courtroom meltdown during the preliminary hearing set the tone for the entire trial. The federal prosecutors moved with ruthless efficiency. They did not need to rely on witness testimony or emotional appeals because the digital footprint I had provided was an impenetrable fortress of evidence. The trial concluded in record time. The jury took less than 4 hours to deliberate before returning with a unanimous verdict on all counts. I sat in my usual seat in the front row of the gallery as the judge called the courtroom to order for the official sentencing. The heavy wooden doors remained closed, sealing the fate of the people who had spent my entire life trying to dictate mine. The judge, a woman who had spent decades presiding over complex corporate fraud cases, looked down at Sabrina from the bench. My sister stood at the defense table. The oversized orange jumpsuit hung loosely on her frame. The vibrant, arrogant spark that used to define her every movement had been completely extinguished. The judge addressed the court, highlighting the sheer scale of the financial devastation Sabrina had caused. She noted the extreme arrogance required to embezzle $15 million from elderly investors to fund a lavish engagement gala. Then the judge brought up the aggravated assault. She read the medical reports detailing my shattered arm and the heavy bronze statue used as a dangerous weapon. The judge sentenced Sabrina to 12 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. Sabrina collapsed back into her wooden chair, letting out a hollow, breathless sob. She looked back at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading panic, but I simply looked right through her. Next, it was my parents' turn to face the absolute finality of the justice system. Thomas and Linda were instructed to stand. My father looked physically sick, his hands trembling violently as he gripped the edge of the defense table. My mother leaned heavily against him, her face buried in her hands. The judge did not hold back. She condemned them for conspiring to cover up a massive corporate felony to protect their social standing. She reprimanded them for actively trying to destroy the life of their eldest daughter to shield a criminal. The gavel struck the sounding block with a sharp crack. Thomas and Linda were sentenced to 5 years each in federal prison for conspiracy and acting as accessories after the fact. As the sentence echoed through the quiet courtroom, Linda let out a piercing, agonizing wail. She whipped her head around to look at me in the gallery. Her face was a twisted mask of sorrow and disbelief, hoping to see a shred of sympathy in my eyes. She found absolutely nothing. My face remained a mask of impenetrable stone. I did not offer her a single ounce of comfort. Before the federal marshals could escort them away, the prosecutor requested permission for me to deliver my victim impact statement. The judge granted the request, nodding respectfully in my direction. I stood up from my seat, smoothing the front of my tailored charcoal suit, and walked calmly toward the podium in the center of the room. I did not bring any notes. I did not need a written script to articulate the reality of my 33 years on this earth. I adjusted the microphone and looked directly at the judge, deliberately ignoring the three convicted felons sitting just a few feet away. I did not speak about the $15 million. I did not mention the complex offshore routing numbers or the corporate accounts I had spent weeks untangling for the FBI. The money was merely a symptom of a much deeper, more insidious disease. I spoke about a lifetime of calculated emotional manipulation. I spoke about what it felt like to be systematically erased in your own home, to be treated as a convenient shield for other people's mistakes. For over 3 decades, my primary function in that household was to absorb the impact of their flaws. I told the silent courtroom, my voice steady and unwavering. I was conditioned to accept abuse as normal and to view my own silence as the price of admission to my family. When I finally uncovered the truth about the financial crimes happening behind closed doors, they did not hesitate to use physical violence to silence me. The assault that shattered my arm was not an isolated incident. It was the physical manifestation of a psychological dynamic that had existed since I was a child. They believed that because they had always been able to control me, I would simply take the hit and sweep their crimes under the rug. I turned my head slightly, allowing my gaze to sweep over my parents and my sister for the very last time. But they underestimated my resilience. They broke my arm, but they could not break my mind. I am not standing here today as a victim of their greed. I am standing here as the person who finally held them accountable. I reclaim my narrative today. I am entirely free of them. I stepped away from the podium. I did not wait to watch the federal marshals place my family in handcuffs. I turned my back and walked straight down the center aisle of the courtroom, pushing open the heavy double doors and stepping out into the bright, chaotic lobby. The hallway was completely packed with local and national journalists. They had been waiting for hours to get a statement from the forensic accountant who had single-handedly brought down her own corrupt family. The camera flashes blinded me for a second as they swarmed forward, shoving microphones and digital recorders in my direction. They shouted questions, asking how I felt about seeing my parents sent to prison, asking if I had any final words for my sister. I raised my hand, signaling for quiet, and the aggressive throng of reporters immediately silenced themselves, waiting for my quote. I have absolutely no comment regarding the individuals who were sentenced today, I stated cleanly, my voice projecting over the clicking cameras. The justice system has spoken, and that chapter of my life is permanently closed. However, I do have an announcement regarding the future of my firm. Over the past several months, I have witnessed exactly how vulnerable private investors can be when the people they trust decide to exploit them. The elderly couples who lost their life savings did not have the tools to spot the fraud hidden deep within those investment portfolios. That changes today. I looked directly into the nearest camera lens. I am officially launching a new nonprofit branch of my forensic accounting firm. We will be dedicating a significant portion of our corporate resources to conducting pro bono financial audits for vulnerable investors and elderly clients who suspect they are being defrauded by predatory brokers. We will hunt down corporate parasites, and we will hand them directly to the federal government. A wave of excited murmurs rippled through the press corps as they frantically typed out my statement. I did not take any follow-up questions. I gave a polite nod to the journalists and walked purposefully through the crowd, moving toward the main exit of the courthouse. My security detail met me at the doors, guiding me down the wide concrete steps toward the busy downtown street. The midday sun was shining brightly, cutting through the cool autumn air. The heavy, oppressive weight that had rested on my shoulders for my entire life was completely gone. The city felt entirely different today. It felt wide open and full of limitless potential. I reached the bottom of the steps where my chauffeur was holding the door of my car open for me. I was just about to slide into the comfortable leather seat of the waiting vehicle when a deep, familiar voice called out my name over the ambient noise of the city traffic. Erica. I stopped and turned around, my hand resting on the polished frame of the open car door. Standing a few yards away near the base of the courthouse steps was Dr. Gallagher. The emergency room trauma surgeon who had taken one look at my shattered arm and refused to accept my father's lies was standing there wearing a sharp navy suit instead of his usual medical scrubs. He had the same tired but incredibly kind eyes I remembered from the chaotic trauma bay. He stepped forward holding 2 cups of coffee in his hands, offering one to me with a small understanding nod. A genuine warm smile spread across my face as I looked at the man who had helped me spark the revolution. He did not see me as the broken, invisible girl my parents had created. He saw me for the formidable woman I truly was. That validation felt incredibly powerful. I knew instantly that this meeting was no mere coincidence. It was a pure, absolute, perfect destiny. I reached out and took the warm cup, letting the comforting heat seep into my fingers. I took a steady, deliberate step toward him, leaving the dark, heavy shadow of my family's total destruction completely behind me forever. The terrible, stifling chapters of my abusive past were permanently over, and the brilliant, uncompromised future I had built for myself was just beginning to beautifully unfold right here on these bright, sunlit city streets. I took a deep breath of the fresh air, realizing that for the first time in 33 years, I was finally safe. I stopped walking, my hand hovering over the polished chrome handle of my waiting luxury car. Dr. Gallagher slowly descended the wide concrete steps of the federal courthouse, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of a tailored navy suit that looked completely different from the sterile medical scrubs he wore the night we first met. He had that same steady, reassuring presence that had cut right through my father's lies in the trauma bay months ago. He smiled warmly as he closed the distance between us. The afternoon sunlight caught the slight silver at his temples. He explained that the federal prosecutors had subpoenaed him to provide expert medical testimony regarding the blunt force trauma that shattered my arm. However, because my family's defense completely imploded during the preliminary hearings and the digital evidence was so overwhelmingly undeniable, the prosecution never actually needed to put him on the witness stand. He had spent the entire morning waiting in a cramped witness room just down the hall from the courtroom. I thanked him for coming, acknowledging that his initial refusal to discharge me into my father's custody was the catalyst that brought my entire toxic family empire down. He looked down at my left arm, noticing that it rested naturally at my side, completely free of the heavy fiberglass cast and the black silk sling I had worn to the country club gala. He observed with a professional nod that the spiral fractures appeared to have healed flawlessly. I rotated my wrist, demonstrating the full range of motion I had regained through weeks of grueling physical therapy. It was a physical testament to my complete recovery from the violence they inflicted. Dr. Gallagher looked at me for a long moment, the clinical evaluation in his eyes shifting into something much warmer and far more personal. He shifted his weight slightly, looking momentarily nervous, which was incredibly endearing for a man who regularly handled life or death emergencies. He asked if I had any immediate pressing meetings to attend, or if I might be willing to get a cup of coffee with him. He quickly clarified that he was asking me out not as a former patient, but as a person he deeply admired and wanted to know better. A decade ago, the invisible, compliant middle child my parents had molded me to be would have stumbled over her words, searching for a polite excuse to decline. But that version of Erica was completely dead and buried. The woman standing on the courthouse steps was an apex predator in the financial world, a millionaire who had just dismantled a corporate crime syndicate. I looked at him, feeling the absolute absence of my past insecurities. I genuinely smiled, my heart beating with a light, hopeful rhythm, and I accepted his invitation. We walked away from the swarm of media vans and the heavy shadow of the federal building, strolling side by side down the busy city sidewalk toward a quiet, upscale cafe he knew a few blocks away. The autumn air was crisp and refreshing, carrying the faint scent of roasted coffee beans and falling leaves. Every single step we took away from that courthouse felt like a glorious, hard-earned victory lap after a lifetime of running in miserable, endless circles. We found a small corner table near the back of the cafe, away from the noise of the afternoon rush. Dr. Gallagher, whose first name was Liam, ordered us 2 black coffees and a plate of warm pastries. As we sat across from each other, the conversation flowed with a surprising effortless ease. We talked about his demanding schedule as a trauma surgeon and the intense high-stakes reality of my work as a forensic accountant. He listened intently as I described the intricate, complex algorithms I used to track offshore shell companies. He did not look at me with the pity or the condescension I was so used to receiving from my extended family. He did not know the fabricated stories my mother had spread about my supposed mental breakdowns. He did not know about the decades of emotional abuse, the constant comparisons to my younger sister, or the brutal way my parents had isolated me. To Liam, I was simply Erica, an incredibly strong, self-made, fiercely intelligent woman who had survived a violent attack and methodically brought her attackers to justice. For the very first time in 33 years, I realized exactly what it feels like to interact with a man who viewed me entirely without the toxic, distorting filter of my family's labeling. I did not have to explain my worth. I did not have to prove I was not a failure. I did not have to shrink my personality to make him feel more comfortable. I was permitted to take up space, to be ambitious, and to be completely respected. The realization washed over me like a warm, healing wave. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the small wooden table, and for the next 2 hours, I just allowed myself to be truly seen. The weeks following the sentencing and that incredible first coffee date with Liam turned into a period of massive, explosive growth for my professional life. I returned to my hidden luxury estate and threw myself entirely into expanding my independent firm. The national news coverage of my family's high-profile corporate downfall had an unintended but incredibly lucrative side effect. My name became synonymous with absolute, uncompromising integrity and ruthless efficiency in the global financial sector. Massive multinational corporations, international banking conglomerates, and top-tier federal regulatory agencies were aggressively bidding for my firm's services. They knew that if I possessed the sheer willpower and the forensic skill to completely dismantle my own corrupt family and hand them over to the FBI would be an unstoppable asset in auditing their own internal networks. My business was absolutely booming. We had to lease 2 additional floors in our downtown high-rise office building just to accommodate the influx of new analysts and cybersecurity experts I was hiring. But the most fulfilling part of my daily routine was the new nonprofit branch I had announced on the courthouse steps. Every single morning, I dedicated 2 hours of my schedule to reviewing pro bono cases for elderly clients who suspected their brokers were siphoning their retirement funds. We were actively hunting down corporate parasites who targeted vulnerable people, exposing their fraudulent ledgers, and passing the airtight digital evidence directly to federal prosecutors. We were bringing true accountability to a system that had protected wealthy criminals like my father for far too long. I was using the very skills my parents had mocked to protect the exact demographic they had so callously exploited. It was late on a Friday afternoon, and the golden hour sunlight was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my expansive corner office. I was sitting at my custom mahogany desk, reviewing a complex data recovery script for an upcoming international audit, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound peace. My phone buzzed on my desk with a sweet, familiar text message from Liam, confirming our dinner reservations at a 5-star restaurant for later that evening. I smiled, typing back a quick reply. Just as I set my phone down, the heavy glass door of my office swung open. My business partner, David, walked into the room carrying 2 crystal tumblers and a bottle of incredibly expensive aged scotch. He had a massive, triumphant grin plastered across his face. He walked directly to my desk and dropped a thick leather-bound portfolio right on top of my keyboard. He announced that we had just officially finalized a massive, multi-year contract to conduct the primary compliance audits for one of the largest federal banking institutions in the entire country. The contract was worth tens of millions of dollars, completely cementing our firm as an untouchable titan in the industry. David poured the amber liquid into the crystal tumblers and handed one to me. He raised his glass, looking at me with absolute pride and deep, unwavering respect. We clinked our glasses together, the sharp, clear ring of the crystal echoing beautifully in the quiet luxury of my office. We toasted to our massive success, to the brilliant future we were building, and to the undeniable power of truth. I took a slow, savoring sip of the scotch, feeling the warm burn travel down my throat. I looked out the window at the sprawling city skyline, completely unburdened by the heavy, suffocating shadows of my past. Exactly 1 year has passed since the heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom swung shut on my past. My left arm, once shattered and encased in heavy fiberglass, is now completely healed. I have full range of motion without a single ache or limitation. The only physical reminder of my sister's violent attack is a faint, thin, silver scar near my wrist. I look at it sometimes while I am typing at my desk or pouring a cup of coffee. I do not look at it with sadness or trauma. I look at it as a permanent, beautiful reminder of the exact moment I chose to stop being their victim. I look at it as a badge of my absolute survival. My forensic accounting firm did not just grow over the last 12 months. It exploded into an absolute industry titan. David and I expanded our operations across 3 state lines, hiring dozens of new analysts to handle the massive influx of federal and corporate contracts. We are the premier firm that institutions call when they need untouchable, ruthless precision. But the crown jewel of my professional life is the nonprofit branch I launched on the courthouse steps. Every day, my team and I uncover hidden frauds targeting the elderly and the vulnerable. We take down predators who act exactly like my father, and we hand their ledgers directly to the federal government. I took the very skills my family mocked and turned them into a shield for people who actually need protection. My personal life has transformed just as profoundly. My relationship with Liam, the brilliant emergency room doctor who refused to discharge me into my father's custody, has blossomed into something incredibly deep and entirely healthy. We do not navigate around fragile egos. We do not walk on eggshells or play toxic, exhausting mind games. He respects my ambition and I respect his demanding career. We celebrate each other's victories without a single ounce of jealousy or condition. For the first time in my 33 years on this earth, I am experiencing what actual unconditional love feels like. I am permitted to take up space to be successful and to be completely myself without apologizing for my existence. It is a crisp Tuesday morning when the final ghost of my past attempts to reach out from the concrete grave she dug for herself. I am sitting at my kitchen island in my penthouse scrolling through my morning emails with a hot cup of tea when an automated notification pops up on my screen. The sender is the Federal Bureau of Prisons. An inmate is requesting approval to add me to their authorized visitation and communication list. The inmate's name is Sabrina. I set my mug down on the marble counter and stare at the screen. I can perfectly picture her sitting in a cold, sterile federal holding room, wearing an oversized orange jumpsuit, begging a guard for 15 minutes of computer access. She has been in federal prison for a full year now. Her 12-year sentence stretches out in front of her like an endless, suffocating tunnel. Colin, the fiancé she stole $15 million to impress, abandoned her completely and is living comfortably in another state. Our parents, Thomas and Linda, are serving their own 5-year sentences in separate federal facilities. They cannot help her. They cannot send her money. They cannot shield her from the brutal reality of the choices she made. Sabrina has absolutely no one left. Her high society friends blocked her number the second the handcuffs clicked shut. She is completely isolated, stripped of her glamour, her wealth, and her false superiority. In her ultimate desperation, she is reaching out to the only person she thinks she can still manipulate. She expects the old Erica to answer. She hopes that the quiet, compliant, invisible middle child is still buried deep inside me, harboring enough residual guilt to drive to that prison and offer her comfort or commissary money. A decade ago, the guilt would have eaten me alive. I would have rationalized her abuse. I would have told myself that family forgives family. I would have driven to that facility to absorb her tears and make her feel better about destroying her own life. But sitting in my quiet, sunlit kitchen today, I feel absolutely nothing. I do not feel pity for her. I do not feel anger or resentment or sorrow. I simply feel profoundly bored by her desperation. I log into the secure federal portal using my credentials. There is a long, pleading message attached to her visitation request, but I do not read a single word of it. I refuse to let her voice inside my head ever again. I move my cursor over the bright red deny button and press it. A secondary prompt appears on the screen asking if I would like to permanently block all future contact requests from this specific inmate. I move my mouse and click yes. With two simple, effortless clicks of a mouse, I completely erase my sister from the rest of my life. The digital door slams shut forever. It is an incredibly quiet, peaceful execution of a boundary I should have drawn 20 years ago. Later that afternoon, I have a meeting downtown with a new corporate client. I tell my private driver to take a specific route through the financial district. I want to see the physical reality of my victory with my own two eyes. We cruise slowly past the towering, expensive glass building that used to house my father's investment firm. The massive, imposing brass letters bearing our family name have been completely ripped down from the marble facade. You can still see the faint, dirty outlines of where the letters used to hang, but the legacy has been entirely scrubbed from the building. The interior of the lobby where my father used to strut around in custom Italian suits intimidating his entry-level employees has been completely gutted. The dark wood panels and the heavy leather furniture have been replaced by bright open white walls and modern track lighting. The space is now a contemporary art gallery. Colorful, vibrant paintings hang exactly where my father used to store his fraudulent, predatory ledgers. The dark, toxic empire he spent his entire life building at the expense of others has been entirely erased from the city. There is absolutely no trace of Thomas, Linda, or Sabrina left in the financial district. They are irrelevant ghosts, forgotten footnotes in a corporate scandal that the city has already moved past. I smile, rolling up the tinted window of my car as we drive away from the gallery. Evening falls over the city, painting the sky in brilliant, sweeping strokes of gold, deep purple, and bruised orange. I stand on the sprawling glass balcony of my $4 million penthouse, far above the noise and the chaos of the streets below. I hold a crystal glass of expensive red wine, feeling the cool, refreshing autumn wind pull gently at my hair. I look out over the glowing, infinite city skyline as the streetlights begin to flicker on, one by one. I take a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp evening air, and I reflect on the incredible, brutal journey that brought me to this exact spot. I think about the terrified, bleeding woman lying on a stiff hospital gurney in Trauma Bay, listening to her father order her to lie to the doctors. I think about the mother who threatened to render her daughter homeless just to protect a criminal. I think about the golden child who shattered my arm because she was terrified of the truth. They tried to break me. They tried to financially starve me, socially ruin me, and legally crush me. They threw the entire weight of their privilege and their arrogance at me, expecting me to shatter into a million compliant pieces. But they did not know I was made of iron. They did not know I possessed the digital keys to their total destruction. I did not just survive their ultimate betrayal. I meticulously, methodically dismantled their entire foundation of lies. I took their weapons and I turned them into ashes. I take a slow, savoring sip of my wine. The heavy, suffocating anchor of my toxic family has been completely severed. It is sinking to the bottom of the ocean, and I am standing at the absolute top of the world. I built a brilliant, uncompromised, beautiful life entirely on my own terms. I am safe. I am successful. I am fiercely loved by the people I have chosen to keep in my life. And for the very first time, as the sun dips below the horizon and the city lights sparkle in the darkness, I am completely, beautifully free. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your family, if you have ever been told to stay quiet, to keep the peace, or if you have ever had to build your own table because there was no room for you at theirs, know that you are not alone. Your worth is not determined by the people who are too broken to see it. Do not be afraid to walk away from the toxicity and build your own empire. Please share your own stories of breaking free and finding your peace in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, boundary setting, and taking back your power. Thank you for listening, and remember that your greatest revenge is simply living a brilliant, happy life.